Aubrey, and welcome back to Stars and Bars, where we analyze your favorite artists' astrological charts and interpret how astrology plays out in their music, lyrics, and career. If you're new here and that sounds interesting to you, feel free to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a video, and let me know in the comments who you want to learn about next. Our subject today is one of my favorite artists of all time, and someone I have been so excited to cover. Since first hearing him in 2010, around the time of his breakout release, K.I.D.S, this artist's music has followed me through almost every stage of adolescence and adulthood, even following his untimely passing in September of 2018. He broke through alongside other influential young rappers such as Meek Mill, Kendrick Lamar, and YG. And in his hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he has a whole day named after him, September 20th, 2013, on which he was given the key to the city. Today, we are talking about Mac Miller. Here is Mac Miller's chart. He is a Capricorn sun with a Cancer moon and an Aquarius rising. His Mercury and Mars are also in Capricorn, along with his Sun, and his Venus is in Sagittarius. His dominant planet is Uranus, and he is Capricorn dominant as well as Earth dominant, which comes as no surprise based on his Capricorn stellium. A stellium is basically a clump of 4+ planets in one sign or house, similar to this thing we have going on here in Capricorn, where we have many planets of Mac Miller's in the same place. One of the first things I looked at when I pulled this chart up for the first time is Jupiter. After all, Jupiter is the planet of expansion and optimism, and these are both topics I associate heavily with Mac Miller. While Mac did have his sensitive, emotional side that came through in some of his music, which we will definitely be talking about here soon, he was most known for his happy-go-lucky, optimistic, goofy persona, and that really comes out when we look at his Jupiter. Now, remember a few moments ago when we talked about Mac's Capricorn stellium? Jupiter is not part of that for Mac. His Jupiter is in Virgo instead of Capricorn. But these are both earth signs, and therefore they are approximately 120 degrees away from each other. When two planets are 120 degrees away from each other, give or take a few degrees, that's known as a trine. This means Mac's Jupiter in Virgo forms trines with his Mercury, Mars, Uranus, and Neptune all in Capricorn. The trine is a harmonious aspect, which means that the planets that are connected by the trine get along with each other, they have similar wants and needs, and they have a harmonious relationship with one another. So Jupiter, the positivity planet, having 4 trines in Mac's chart, 5 if you count the North Node, means lots of optimism in the native's personality, and it helps to balance out all of that Capricorn energy that could make someone more pessimistic or rigid. So optimism is our first trait for the day. On another side of the same multidimensional human coin, another big trait in Mac Miller's chart is his inner sensitivity. His moon is the culprit for this. Not only is his moon in Cancer, which is an emotional and receptive and nurturing sign, but in his chart the moon also forms an opposition with the sun and a trine with Pluto. It's relevant that Mac's moon is in Cancer because that is the sign that it rules. Every planet rules at least one sign, and the moon, which is the planet of emotion, intuition, and motherhood, rules Cancer. If a planet is found in the sign that it rules, it is known as being in dominion. We'll often refer to that in our videos as at home because it's a little easier to understand. But when a planet is in dominion, it increases the strength of that planet and that sign. The energy is even stronger, and it makes that planet's dealings come more naturally to the native. So Mac having his moon in Cancer makes emotions and sensitivity come more naturally to him. Another artist that we've covered who has a Cancer moon is Halsey, and you will find a link to that video in one of these top corners. Moving on to the moon's aspects, which we mentioned earlier, we have the moon opposite the sun and the moon trine Pluto aspects. Starting with moon opposite sun, this is a challenging aspect wherein Mac's practical, stable Capricorn sun and his emotionally supercharged Cancer moon don't really understand one another or get along, further complicating how Mac does sun-ruled things, such as perceiving and projecting his identity, and deciding whether to lead with logic or emotion when making decisions. Thus, a common effect of this placement is emotional intensity. And fun fact, when someone has the sun opposite the moon, so sun in Capricorn and moon in Cancer, for example, it means they were born on a full moon. The moon trine Pluto aspect, on the other hand, is a harmonious aspect, and you may know that if you remember a couple minutes ago. Pluto is the planet of death, rebirth, and transformation, and is the modern ruler of intensely emotional Scorpio, which is also where Pluto is in Mac's chart. So both his moon and his Pluto are at home or in dominion in the signs that they rule. And the fact that those two form any aspect with each other, whether it be the trine, opposition, or otherwise, increases Mac's inner sensitivity, and that is our second trait for the day. And for our third and final trait in the bars, I want to direct our focus back to that sun opposite moon aspect. Emotional intensity and a sense of inner struggle are indeed traits of this aspect that we've already discussed, but this placement also gives the native a profound sense of self-awareness. This is a trait that I think a lot of Mac's fans always admired, appreciated, and respected about him. It made him relatable because he could, with masterful nuance, explain how he was feeling or thinking and objectively evaluate it. I love Mac's discussion on this topic in his lyrics, and I look forward to breaking it down. So those are our traits in the bars for today. We have optimism bestowed upon him by his Jupiter and the 4 trines that it forms. We have inner sensitivity, which is bestowed upon him by his heavily aspected Cancer moon. And we have the sun opposite moon aspect, which brings profound sense of self-awareness. But before we get into the lyrics, let's go ahead and break down his career a little bit. We often don't start with it, but we are going to this time. And something that we like to talk about here on this channel is the midheaven. The midheaven, if you don't know, is a career angle in the chart. It explains a little bit about career choices or career situation. And Mac Miller's midheaven is in Sagittarius. We have talked a lot about optimism already as it regards to Jupiter, and Jupiter is the planet that rules Sagittarius, so it makes a lot of sense that Mac Miller's midheaven is in this happy-go-lucky, adventurous, philosophical sign. Another thing besides that optimism and philosophy is escapism. This is a common Sagittarian trait for sure, and something that Mac is really good at discussing and relating to. We're not going to break down that trait too seriously in this video because we already have in the Janae Aiko video, so you can click the link once again up here in one of these corners to get to that. Janae Aiko has significant Sagittarius placements alongside other placements that cause her to be very escapist as well. Mac also has the sun in the 12th house, which also plays into escapism. Now back to philosophy real quick. Mac Miller does tend to be pensive and even philosophical, especially in his later music. Another Sagittarian trait as well is adaptability, and if you've listened to a decent spread of Mac Miller's music, you probably know that this is very appropriate to describe him. So it makes a lot of sense that his career angle is in this mutable sign of Sagittarius. It really fits better than any other sign I can think of that it could possibly be in, so... Along with the midheaven, I like to look at Jupiter. We've discussed Jupiter a decent amount as far as the aspects it makes, but I do want to quickly talk about the sign that it's in, which is Virgo. Virgo is an analytical and practical sign ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is the planet of communication and speech. Jupiter also brings luck to wherever it is in the chart, so it makes a lot of sense that Mac Miller's Jupiter would be in a speech-focused sign like Virgo, as Mac was able to manifest good fortune by way of a communication-based career like hip-hop. Another interesting placement in Mac Miller's chart is his Mars in the 11th house. Another artist with this placement that we've covered is Tyler, the Creator, so once again, up here for that link. Mars in the 11th house is a placement that causes the native to put a lot of energy and work into their friendships, as the 11th house is the house of friends, and Mars is the planet of aggression and energy output. People with this placement involve their friends wherever possible, including work, hobbies, art, etc., and this includes music. In addition to many friends with whom he frequently collaborated, such as Schoolboy Q, Absol, and Wiz Khalifa, Mac was friends seemingly with just about everyone in the music industry. When he passed, it was as though that was the only news that had happened anytime around then. The same thing happened on his birthday. On social media, it seemed like every artist on my radar was posting pictures and memories with Mac. People that I didn't even know that he had ever been around because it wasn't in the news or in his music. It shows that besides his craft, his friendships were something that Mac really liked to invest in and spend lots of time and energy cultivating. And this is absolutely what I would expect from a Mars in the 11th house native. The tendency to form deep bonds with anyone you meet is also a Moon trine Pluto trait, an aspect that we've mentioned earlier. Finally, Mac's sound, lyrics, production, visuals, punchlines, etc. are all littered with creative genius. The Recording Academy obviously agreed with this when they nominated him for a Grammy. 2 placements of Mac's that lend themselves to creative genius are Mercury conjunct Neptune and Jupiter trine Uranus. So we're going to do something just a little bit different from what we usually do. So if you've seen my videos before, forgive me for changing up the flow a little bit. So generally I will, in part 2, list our trait, and then I will go through all of the albums, giving the examples or most relevant examples from the album to that trait. But it causes us to kind of skip back and forth between naming albums and naming traits and naming songs, and it just gets a little bit messy. So instead of doing that, we're just going to talk about all of the albums right now, and then we'll reference them when they become relevant. That being said, Mac has many albums, EPs, and mixtapes, and I will be only talking about the main full-length projects, starting with his breakout project. But don't you worry, there are still 9 projects for us to cover, so there will be no shortage of content. Mac's breakout project was his 4th mixtape, K.I.D.S, from 2010. This project shows a ton of the optimism he gets from having such a well-aspected Jupiter and having a Sagittarius midheaven. That is definitely the most prominent placement lyrically. I also see some of the Cancer moon sentimentality. Sonically, this project is bright and happy, which is very reminiscent of Sagittarian traits. Following K.I.D.S, we have the 5th mixtape in Mac Miller's discography, which is 2011's Best Day Ever. This project shows a lot of the Jupiter/Sagittarius optimism and fun-loving goofiness, like the last album. There is more Cancerian romanticism on this album and a little bit more sensitivity than the other one, and we also see some of Mac's philosophical Sagittarian trait. The next project is Mac's debut album, Blue Slide Park. This album came out in late 2011 and has the most love-related content so far of his albums. This shows Mac's practical but romantic Capricorn Venus and his Cancer moon. This album also touches more on Mac's struggles, but maintains Jupiter optimism regardless of all of that Capricorn practicality. Our 4th project for the day is 2012's Macadelic, the 7th mixtape in his discography. It advances the thematic crescendo, if you will, into deeper reflection and expression of negative emotions, which started in Blue Slide Park. The more pessimistic side Mac gets from his Capricorn, Sun, and Stellium comes out a little bit more in this album. Mac also talks more on this project about substance use and escapism, showing more Sagittarian influence. This is also the most romantic album so far, so this mixtape kind of goes a lot of different directions, but we see just about every aspect of Mac on this album. At the time, this was Mac's darkest album to date in both sound and lyrics, highlighting Mac's 12th house placements that give him a deep connection to psychology, emotionality, and the subconscious. Following Macadelic, we have 2013's Watching Movie with the Sound Off, where Mac really leans into his darker, more pessimistic Capricorn traits. He also engages in some good Cancer/Sagittarian introspection. We are also introduced to Mac's first alter ego, Delusional Thomas, who represents his subconscious. This album also has several features from Mac's friends, highlighting his 11th house Mars. Funny enough, Odd Future members and affiliates make up some of those features, and Tyler the Creator was the first artist that I covered that had that placement and trait, so I found that to be pretty interesting. Next, we have 2015's Good AM, which was Mac's major label debut with Warner Bros. It is less introspective than watching movies and more optimistic, but more than anything, it's just hype, fun, and braggadocious. This is big Sagittarius energy and not really a whole lot else on this album. I love this album. I'm not trying to make it sound like it's nothing special because it really is a lot of fun. But that's what it is, you know, it's hype. That goes for lyrics and sound alike for this album. Next, we have Mac's fourth album, 2016's The Divine Feminine. This completes our build to romance with the most romantic project yet, and also is more positive overall than watching movies, but that's not hard to achieve. The two placements best represented on this album are probably obvious. We're looking at his sensitive Cancer moon, which is an extremely receptive energy, and also his Capricorn Venus. Sonically, this album has a lot of romantic and sweet sounds, which also pushes those Venus and moon placements. Next, we have Mac's final album before his passing, 2018's Swimming. Mac navigates and attempts to overcome a broken heart on this album, along with some complicated feelings following a breakup and a DUI arrest. He starts to find optimism that we haven't seen in a few projects, shown by lyrics and the funk jazz sounds, and it is really great to see him be more optimistic on this album after a few albums of concept or of pessimism. Swimming seems to be a metaphor for the space between light or air and dark or drowning. Mac has said before that he appreciates both positive and negative aspects to life and doesn't want to only experience one or the other. This comes through a lot in this album, and more so than any others. In fact, I feel like in the other albums, most of the time, it seems like he's focusing on either the positive or the negative. And finally, at the front of his discography, we have Mac's first posthumous album, Circles, a companion album to Swimming, but it is much less optimistic than Swimming. It discusses repetitive cycles that Mac finds his life taking. Escapism, substance abuse, and depression are also major themes on this album. So we see a lot of the Sagittarius, Cancer, and Capricorn on this album, with Sagittarian philosophy, Cancerian sensitivity, and Capricorn melancholy. Sonically, the duality of melancholy and attempts to positivity come through a lot, and it is mostly a melodic album. This is not the same hip-hop rap album that we're used to getting from Mac. Hello, Stars and Bars fam. You have arrived at the end screen. That is not a mistake. This video is pretty long, so I have split it into two parts. If part 2 has been released yet, you should see a link to it on your screen or in the description, and if not, it'll be out in the next couple of days. Thank you so much for watching.